Hello, everyone. It's Mark Wilkinson here. I hope you're all good. It's an amazing evening tonight. This is our monthly episode of Straight to Talking. Tonight is quite incredible, to be honest. The way it's actually come about is a story in itself. Some of you who follow my regular streams and my regular lives around Life Remixed and the book and everything else would have heard me talk about the law of attraction quite a lot. And the law of attraction kind of like just brings people together in different ways about the ways you think about. And I've got a friend and a good coaching client as well called Kev, and he's in Qatar, working over there in health and safety. And he suggested one day when we were on a call together, he said, "Have you seen Last Breath on Netflix?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, you should give it a go. It's about this bloke." And he told me his story. And I was just like, it does sound pretty interesting. And it was a Saturday afternoon. And I remember there was no football on the TV, and Emma was upstairs doing something. I thought, I've got nothing better to do. So I know what I'll do. I'll stick this documentary on. I started watching it, and it really did start to completely blow my mind. I started to watch it, and this whole diving incident and everything that went on in the documentary Last Breath on Netflix, it was incredible. So there I am watching it, and it made me think of a good friend of mine called George Jones, who I know had made a change into diving from being a DJ and record producer, and possibly remarking to himself that he was kind of a big deal once. But I'm not sure about that. He's laughing. I can see him. It's fine. So the point is that I messaged George on that afternoon, and I said, "George, this Last Breath, this is amazing. And by the way, you owe me a phone call about the gig that we're doing together in the summer in Norwich. But this Last Breath documentary, this is blowing my mind. And I know you're involved in this in somehow. You know, it's how you do it at Facebook, isn't it? You kind of keep in touch with people. And you're involved in this somehow." And George just sent me like a one line about it. It's just incredible. He just said, "Oh yeah," he said, "Chris Lemons is sitting 3 feet away from me." And I was just like, "What?" And slowly but surely, through the goodwill of three fantastic gentlemen, we've ended up with tonight's Straight Talking. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be a complete review of the background of what these saturation divers actually do. And then we're going to talk about the documentary. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the incident itself. And the outcomes of it as well. So it's going to be a great evening. I really appreciate you all being here with us. And I'm going to stop waffling now, and I'm going to start to bring some people into the room with me. So I'm going to bring in the star of the unwitting star of the documentary first, because I think he needs maximum time on screen. He's an absolute lovely gentleman. I'm very glad he survived as well, because he's here to join us tonight. So here he is. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Mark. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks very much. More importantly, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, well, just while I had my vaccine, my first jab yesterday, so a bit under the weather today. But apart from that, all is well. Yeah.
All right. Well, you're going to style it out, and you're going to be with us tonight. It's going to be a great interview. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it. Next up is the big deal himself. Is my good friend. I've known him for 25 years. And somehow, not sure how, actually Chris's dive supervisor. Yeah, look at the eyebrow. I can see the eyebrow there. Here he is, the man himself, George Jones. Hi, George.
How you doing, Chris?
Yeah.
Mark, you all right?
Yeah. Really good, mate. Really good. How are you?
Well, who would have thought this would have come together?
It's a fascinating situation that we've brought this together, and I'm really grateful to you, George, as well, because I know you clearly, you're Chris's supervisor, so you obviously kind of like give him a nudge to do this as well. So I'm joking, chaps, but anyway, thank you.
Thanks for mentioning the big deal.
I think is what you're looking for. Yeah.
George, what did you say there?
I said thanks for mentioning the big deal comment, which was came from Chris, if I remember right.
Yeah, that was completely fictitious. I'll exonerate George right there. Yeah, that was all my doing. Sorry.
I'll tell you what though. It's very, very funny. I love it. I love chaps with a sense of humour. But last but not least, a good friend of mine. I've only known him the last few months, but he's become a really great friend. Is Kev here in Qatar? He's joining us late into the evening. How are you, Kev?
I'm all right, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I see you've had a nice haircut just for the occasion.
just for the occasion. We're still on lockdown, so I had to get somebody to come over the house to do it.
Well, they've done a lovely job, mate. They've done a lovely job.
I know, I do look pretty good.
Yeah. Even if you do say so yourself. Anyway, so we've got a few people that are going to join us throughout the evening. First one, I don't know who they are because sometimes they haven't logged into StreamYard, but we've just got Chris Lemon. What a legend! So that's a nice start. And good evening. And that's
to agree with that straight away.
Chris Lemon, you absolute legend. So that's amazing. So. A little bit of background first and foremost before we get into anything else. A little bit of background about what you guys exactly do. Because George, I'll come to you first. I've seen you post some stuff on Facebook over the last 10 years, but didn't really appreciate what you went through or how you even got into it or anything like that. So give us a little bit of background, George.
I don't think anyone realises really. You can tell people exactly what you do, and it doesn't really mean anything. We work offshore, we do, sort of deep water diving as opposed to, the shallow scuba stuff. It's living in chambers for, in the North Sea up to 28 days at a time, really confined space, diving out of diving bells. Doing oil and gas work. And it doesn't really mean anything to anyone. You can't explain it. You can show videos, etc. But essentially, we work in the oil and gas industry, doing maintenance, repair, installation, taking out old stuff, decommissioning. Basically, anything that's subsea or below the surface in the North Sea to do with oil and gas, that's done by the people like us, divers. Mostly saturation, which is the deep, generally the deeper stuff, although we do work quite shallow these days. But generally, it's for the deeper water stuff in the North Sea.
And so we're talking about this particular incident was about 100 meters or 300 feet. Is that the average you would go to? I mean, is that is that deep or is that, I don't know, it gives some perspective.
Well, I mean, North Sea, we work in the southern sector, which is sort of off Norfolk, Great Yarmouth, quite a lot at the moment. That's, really shallow in as, we're sort of diving 25, 30 meters, which is really shallow, 25 meters often at the moment. In fact, most of the southern sector is, between sort of 25 and 40 roughly. Then as you move further north, it sort of shelves off and gets deeper until we get up to off Shetland, which is 160, 50, 60, 70 meters. I'd say average is sort of, between 70 and 120 meters, really. I suppose that's average. But like I said, our company I work for at the moment is doing a lot of decommissioning work in the southern sector. Mm-hmm. So that consequently is mostly shallow and tidal. Strong currents and usually terrible visibility. So, you're working and you can't actually see, often can't see what you're doing. Well, I can because I'm on the ship in dive control.
We're going to come to that. We're going to come to that. Just a quick question about the chambers before we move on. You do 28 days in the chamber and then you do the dive. Is that correct?
No, you compress to you compress to the pressure that you would be diving at, essentially, right. And that's the pressure you live at in the chamber. So where with scuba diving, you'd have usually have a decompression as you come out. With saturation diving, you have no decompression at all for the whole, say 23 or 4 days, whatever. And then you have one long, slow decompression at the end. 100 meters will be roughly 4 days. And it's a long decompression. So you just have one. So what that enables you to do is the lads are doing 6 hours in the water at a time. Doing an 8-hour dive, usually about 7 hours generally. But you're diving about 6 hours, maximum 6 hours each dive. So with no decompression penalties at all. So that's why saturation diving means you can dive 24 hours a day on a vessel like the one that we work on. And it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's literally non-stop, usually.
And just, it's not all glamour, George, clearly.
Well, they sell it as, when you do your diving courses, you're going to be, travel the world, and but that's just bollocks. It's not like that at all. In fact, when you're up to your bum in mud, and it doesn't feel very glamorous.
I'm sure the 40 grand. I'm sure the 40 grand a month takes the edges off. I'm joking.
The money gone.
Yeah. What did you say? I said that to you the other day. You said I haven't taken a pay cut. Anyway, so there's a few things popping up here as well. So John, good health and safety guy I worked with at Heathrow, just says evening all. Looking forward to the chat. He's on YouTube. Jason saying good evening. Steve says George definitely looks the best.
He's one of the lads we work with, Steve. Good diver, Steve. Although he's a very odd-looking bloke.
Hang on, he says this. Look. Yeah, I'm sure, Steve. I'm sure. It's great to have you here, mate. Thanks for being here. Someone's asked, what's the deepest you go to? Can you give us a quick run on that?
We've done some work in Israel and Egypt, which is sort of, the 220, 230 meter mark.
Wow.
But that's, it really, once you go past 190, sort of 200 meters, things really, it's a lot harder. The environment you live in is much tougher. It's much harder to get your breath back, and all sorts of physiological things that make that deeper stuff. But in answer to your question, 220, 230, that's really, there has been deeper stuff, and there's been a lot of experimental stuff, and there's been diving in Brazil, which is a lot deeper, but that isn't, that's not the norm.
No. And just before we kind of move into other areas, just tell the world how we kind of know each other. And before you do that, Michelle says she's fascinated already, which is great. Thanks, Michelle. And Chris hasn't said anything yet, so that's good. It's just you, George.
That is good,
well, yeah. This is a funny story, because your story is, you were, let's just call it a superstar DJ, as we all know you were, or were. I sort of came about, we put on parties and produced. I had a studio. In the early 90s, we started releasing vinyl and records, and you came up to play at some of, my best friend Jay Patel, his partner Bunny, so probably pretty much instigated the club scene in pretty much the whole of the east of England, I would have said, sort of Norfolk, etc. The way we met was because you were playing at one of those things, probably one of Jay's events with Rocky and the like.
Yeah.
We produced some records together. So amongst, the social aspect of it, we actually got in the studio together. I think I engineered a couple of things which were released, weren't they?
I'll name two straight away. Mono Rage Groove Jet was one.
Yeah,
that was on a Zuli. And then another one we did, I think I did a remix of one of your tracks, Mark Wilkinson versus Junk 45. And I forgot the acapella, but it was a Lilette Highway.
So the Junk 45, I mean, we produced for a record company in Romford, the Stage One music company, and we did that for years. And then I met Will. We did some breakbeat nights up in Norwich with Jay. And we met Will White from the Propeller Heads, and we ended up doing a few projects together in the studio. So, and that was the Junk 45 part when we sort of did those projects on Kidology. But really, I think we spoke about this a few times over the years. I think I saw the writing was on the wall with the music industry. So small-time producers like us, which
hang on. Kind of a big deal, I thought.
Well, with you.
Keep going.
But the reality of the music industry is it was never going to supply a career, as in, let's just put it, I didn't want to be a skint musician. It's all well and good having a fantastic studio, but unless you're making money out of it. And although we were DJing a lot, it wasn't ever going to be a career unless you're Avicii or someone like that. So that sort of brought me into diving purely because my family's in diving. My brother runs quite a big inshore diving company, probably it's still one of the biggest sort of companies inshore. So I got involved with that and changed. I just thought that I could do that and still do music. So it sort of run concurrently. But unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, obviously fortunately, it sort of turned out I was all right at diving. So that kind of just took over in the end. And obviously, music industry has changed beyond recognition, as you well know. So
absolutely,
it was the right move and a very good move. But it's very similar, or there's certainly connections to your story, you know, where you totally changed what you were doing because you had to, obviously for health reasons and various other reasons. But it's similar, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you did your own live remix, which I absolutely love, and I really appreciate you giving us that kind of overview there, George, as well, and certainly talking about a bit about our history. Because Chris, you basically had no idea that George was into like music and record production and anything like that, because you work offshore and you said you don't really talk to each other that much.
Well, we do talk. You know, I've probably known George since when I first met George, he was a diver and I wasn't. You know, so he was, you know, indirectly, if you like, one of the people who sort of inspired me to get into it in the first place, because I used to see George and his like in the chambers and diving, and you know, I decided at some point that I wanted to follow suit, and I think they probably turned up in, you know, nicer cars than I did on the key side as well. But yeah, I think that must have been back in 2005 or something like that that I probably first met George earlier. Yeah, something like that. And yeah, and literally the day that he came across to me the other day and said, "Oh, you know, this my friend Mark has seen the film," was the first time I heard anything about his musical background. So you'd have to ask him why he keeps it quiet. But yeah, it was great. Yes, I was straight off to look you both up.
The thing is, I think I said this to you the other day, Mark. I think and Chris, you'll understand this, is that you work offshore and you dive with people. You kind of know them well, but there's a lot of people have a lot of different backstories, and they have other things going on at home, different jobs, different businesses. You know, lots of the lads have got other businesses out of diving that they run while they're offshore. You know, and things like being involved in music or clubs and, you know, the like is not something that you just offer up anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not the sort of thing, all right, I'm George, oh, by the way, I used to do that. You know, you just don't do that, you know. So it sort of started coming out that there was a bit of history to it, but it didn't really come from me. It was sort of from other things. Like, but the point is, you work with people and you don't necessarily always get to know, you know, the full backstory.
I think. Sorry, Mark. I was just going to say, just briefly, you know, touching on the film quickly. You know, I know we're going to talk about Dave a bit later, but you know, Dave probably puts it quite well in the film. I think, you know, he has two personas almost. That he has home Dave, where he is father of two, and you know, and a lovely father, and then he has work Dave, where he's, you know, a professional. And there's a little bit of that as well, isn't there, George? You know, you want to maintain a professional decorum, don't you? I suppose. So, you know, some things maybe aren't discussed. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's different, sort of as you go, you know, further up the ladder, whichever way you look at it. So now I'm supervising, you know, it's slightly different again, you know, because you have a different relationship with people once you're supervising, you know, because you're in charge of so much as a dive supervisor on a ship offshore, you know, and you do end up having a very different relationship with people because of that.
So I've got a few more shouts to come out here. So Michael's just saying that if you're watching on my personal profile, by the way, I can't put you on the screen. I don't know why that is, but I can see Emma, Michael, Jason Anchor, MBE is watching us. Caroline Jackson's watching us. Loads of people tuning in, watching us live here as well. Someone else just says Georgie boy. So there you go, George. That's for you. So we've got lots of interest. Chris, I'd really like to ask you, you know, how did you get into diving in the first place? What was the driver there, really? Apart from the nicer cars and everything else, you must have, I mean, Morag, your fiance at the time, but your now wife, I presume. Oh, yeah, I saw the marriage. Yes.
Yeah, no, you're good there. Yeah.
We need to talk about your comment on the wedding as well. It's very funny about the kiss on the lips and all that. Anyway, the point is that you know, how did you get into it in the first place? What was the thing for you?
Yeah, it is. I mean, what I described is kind of it, really. They're, Dave and Duncan. If you've seen the film, who are both involved, have got slightly more romantic backstories than I have. They both came into diving because it was their passion, which is kind of what Morag infers in the film, isn't it? But that's probably not actually strictly true for me. Dave was a sort of scuba diving instructor out in Thailand, and Duncan's just been a fan of Jacques Cousteau's as a little boy, and passionate about diving. And they both sort of found a way to make their passion their vocation, which is great. And I wish it was a bit more like that for me. But I was a young man, sort of very early 20s, and maybe a bit lost, I suppose, as to what to do with my life. I didn't really have any particular direction, and I just got given a summer job almost, but that happened to be on the back deck of a dive support vessel. In fact, the dive support vessel that George was a diver on at the time, and so I used to sort of work out and deliver tools and bits and bobs down to the divers using the cranes, and see all the equipment that they used to use and that kind of thing. So I got to see them firsthand, and there was a sort of a bit of I guess an epiphany at that point where I thought, that's what I want to do. And, I think life's a lot simpler, isn't it, when you've got a bit of direction and drive. And suddenly I found a sort of reason to push myself and find a way in life. So that's how I got into it, really. I sort of, fell into it, really, yeah.
I mean, you basically found a purpose, and you kind of like, you followed that through and you got into it. Because, for me, I mean, I didn't realize I had a claustrophobia problem until someone tried to put me in an MRI scanner, and I suddenly realized I was like, I don't like this at all. Now, you told me earlier, Chris, you're 6'5", right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a big lad. Was the claustrophobia? I mean, did you have to overcome fears to be able to just like get it, do that? I mean, what was the process?
I don't think I've never had a fear of that, really. I think that would be a serious hindrance. I'm sure George would agree. It's a serious hindrance in our career if you're claustrophobic, because that's sort of
not ideal.
No, it's not ideal. You'd have a lot of work to do, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally living in a claustrophobic environment, and it's not just the sense of confinement that you have in those chambers. It's also the sense, George sort of touched on the 4 or 5 days of decompression. But the truth is that 4 or 5 days of decompression can't be circumnavigated. So if your mother dies, or if your appendix bursts, or anything of that nature, or anything in between, you still have to go through that, that 4 or 5 days of decompression. So you need to be somebody who can psychologically deal with that sort of pressure that, on day one, when you get into those chambers and the door is shut, there is no way out. There's just sort of slightly, it's definitely an overly flattering analogy with, it's sort of quicker to get back from the moon, somehow comparing us to astronauts, which is completely unfair, because you need to be able to tie your shoelaces to be an astronaut. They but that's the truth that it takes sort of 3 days to get back from the moon, whereas if you're down at 100 plus meters, there is this unavoidable 5 days of decompression. So that part of things is claustrophobic in a psychological sense. But a lot of the work as well is in very dark, muddy water where you can't see your hand in front of your face, and you need to be somebody who can become comfortable with that. And again, George will testify. You'll see divers, who've been divers quite a long time, get into saturation diving, and on their first trip to the bottom, they can be like lost souls, because it could be a sort of intimidating and lonely place to be if you're not sure of yourself and not comfortable in that sort of environment. It's not I'm lucky, I suppose. It's not something that's ever really bothered me. I'm sure there are some divers who carry on with their careers even though it does. But it's definitely don't want to be claustrophobic, that's for sure.
No, certainly.
With the you before you sort of do the deep diving, your saturation diving course, you've done other diving before that. So you've had a diving helmet on your head, and you've been in horrible black water, and all this stuff. But it's such a big difference, even though the diving aspect is you're underwater, you've got a yellow helmet on your head. But it's very, very different when you're diving out of a diving bell, and you know that, you can't just come out. And that's, I think, Chris, you just explained that quite well, is that there's quite a bit of pressure on you to perform. When you first get in, you've got to be half decent, otherwise you can't hide. There is nowhere to hide. Everyone's watching you. There's screens all around the ship, so every single person on the boat can see what's going on the seabed. and it's for, you know, all those thoughts going on. It's not just, you know, having the helmet on your head. You've already done that, but it's for living in a chamber, diving out of a bell. As Chris, you know, very well put it, is you can't just come out. So if you don't like it, you know, the commercial cost of you not liking it is massive. I mean, it's, you know, it's a multi-million-pound job, you know, every day, or, you know, it's a very, very expensive business. To put 3 divers on the seabed, 2 divers, you know, and their standby diver, it costs a lot of money to do that. So there's all sorts of aspects of not liking it. You know, you can't just say, well, I don't like it, I want to come out. You know, it's,
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a lot of training before you get anywhere near that. But I think, you know, lots of people that don't do diving or you know, don't even understand anything that we're talking about up to this point with saturation diving, lots of people will watch that the documentary The Last Breath, and they will have, you know, anxiety issues around it, where they're literally just watching it going, oh my God, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And I mean, I'm getting so many questions coming up here on the screen from every area. It's amazing. I want to get to you all. I promise you, I want to get to you all. There's so many questions that are coming up, statements are coming up. Quite a good one there straight away is maybe a silly question, but do you have Wi-Fi and internet in the chamber? And if not, what the hell do you do for entertainment? And is it an all-male crew?
Those questions seem quite linked, don't they? You know what I mean? One is inferring to the next, doesn't it?
I hear you. And then follow up is actually, that's 3 silly questions. It's not 3 silly questions, but you know, the chamber. What goes on in the chamber? You know, as in, like, you know, you're living in there for a while. You know, you've got music in there. You've got banging house music. I mean, what goes on?
You go. Go on.
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, on the ship that we work on, the Topaz at the moment, you've got 6 men in a chamber, which is maybe 7 feet diameter. So, you know, it's a small space. You've got a bunk and a seating area, as anyone that's seen, you've seen the film, but for those that haven't, it's a really tiny space. And you've got 2 teams of, you've got 6 guys in there, that'll be 2 teams of 3 divers. You're on different shifts, so often you're having to be so quiet because you're not trying to disturb the other team. Is you try not to disturb the other guys, because, you know, that's really important that you know, so often you're being about as quiet as you can possibly be, which is not easy. But as far as internet, yes, these days there is internet in the chambers. It's absolutely shit. You know, you literally can barely send a WhatsApp. So,
oh my God,
you know, it sounds, oh, well, you must have really, really good No, we have internet, but it's rubbish. That's just a fact.
So you're not watching Netflix documentaries in there.
You are not watching You're not watching YouTube in a really crap format. You know, it's really, really poor. But anyway,
I need to ask you another question. Have you got a bird outside your window?
What sort of bird?
I could just hear a bird singing. I could just hear a bird tweeting. I don't know. All I can hear is like a bird tweeting. I don't know which one of you's got something. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Move on. So look, and then the other bit about in the documentary is about the helium voice, because the helium voice, right? You start laughing because you hear it, and it's really funny for about 30 seconds, right, Chris? I mean, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, exactly. I think that's right. It is funny. It is funny for a little bit, but it can become. We sort of forget we have it, to be honest. When you're in there, but it's when George touched a little bit on communications with home and stuff, and that can be an extremely frustrating thing when you're communicating at home, because it's not just a silly squeaky voice. Because if you're very shallow, if you're working at sort of 10 or 20 meters or something like that, you're fairly comprehensible, so you can phone home and have a relatively decent conversation, and people at home get attuned to it as well. But once you get deep, get towards 100 meters, it's I'm not quite sure what it is. I think it's sort of your vocal cords being constricted or something like that. But you become very, very difficult to understand, almost unintelligible. So that can sort of render conversations difficult and frustrating, and particularly when you're in there for a month at a time. So life is going on without you, and there are still problems to be solved, and you've still got to deal with a bank manager, or you've still got to you might have issues at home, like we all do, with the kids or the wife or anything like that, and those things just tend to get exacerbated because you can't have a decent conversation, and you just spend your whole time repeating yourself and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's frustrating more than anything, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, little things you don't think about, little things that I've never thought about you trying to do your internet banking or trying to sort something out with while you're deep under the North Sea. I've never thought of that. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. So, like I said, there's been a real buzz about this. We've got so many people watching. It's amazing. Let's start to talk a little bit about the documentary in itself, because I think that's the real meat of this. We want to get into that. So the Topaz is the vessel, and George, you actually became a dive supervisor. You did all your deep sea diving. You became a dive supervisor the next time the Topaz went out after this incident, correct?
Yeah, well, I joined the Topaz. I think the incident was in the September, and I joined at the end of the year of 2012. I did two diving jobs on the Topaz before I started training. I basically moved over to that company to do my supervisor training, and I was very, very lucky to be given that opportunity. Because to get into supervising, opportunity is the main thing, but you've also got to have backing of managers and companies, and the managers on board the boat have got to be okay with it. Also, the supervisors that are going to let you, that are going to train you, have got to be okay with it.
George, they've got to believe in you, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, they have to. And I'm sort of involved with, a bit of training now. Chris is, I'm sure we'll touch on that anyway. But Chris is right at the start of supervisor training. And it's, so anyway, getting back to that, I moved over, did 2 diving jobs on the Topaz, and then started my supervisor training, which was, up to 2013.
So let me go to Chris then. So Chris, let's talk about the documentary. Let's talk about you and the team. So you, Dave and Duncan. You, Dave and Duncan go into the chamber. Had you dived with them much before? I think you were relatively inexperienced compared to them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. Yeah, I mean, I've been a diver for quite a while, but certainly in terms of that saturation diving, that type of diving, I was only about a year and a half perhaps into my sort of that career of that type of diving. Yeah, so and it's certainly in its infancy for me. Dave had been around quite a while. Duncan a very, very long time, and Duncan I'd spend a lot of time with. When you first start, you sort of going into saturation, they often sort of give you somebody to go in with, and Duncan was that man for me. So he played a big part in my career to that point. I think most of my rotations into saturation had been with Duncan, so he'd been the sort of the hand on the tiller, guiding me through everything, and he'd become a bit of a father figure, I suppose. He's fantastic at doing that, and he was very supportive. And
wasn't he called the Sat Daddy or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's that was a new one on me, but yeah, that's right. So how Dave puts it. Yeah. It was true. Yeah.
So he's obviously, he's got a real, I guess like emotional connection to you in some ways there. If he's a father figure and he's, you've worked together, there's an emotional connection between you and Duncan, and he's the bellman. So he doesn't leave the bell. He's in the bell all the time. And then there's Dave. So, I mean, first, Chris, you give me a little bit about Dave, and then we'll go back to George as well. But Chris, I mean, Dave, you spent time with Dave in the chamber, and then obviously you're diver 1. Well, he's diver 1 and you're diver 2, and you go off to the manifold to do your work, right? So, but he calls himself the Vulcan, right? Or that's certainly what he got called. And tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think George wants to talk about Dave a bit as well, doesn't he? Don't you? But I mean, I'll cast him first, really, and say that Dave is a really fantastic bloke. He really is. He's intelligent, and I like to think he's one of my closer friends offshore, really. And he's moved to work for another company about a year ago, so I don't see so much of him anymore. But he's certainly the film. If you've seen it or you get to see it, there's a certain there's a touch of characterization, I think, about the three of us. I'm given the sort of the new boy role, which was partly true, but not entirely. And then Duncan gets to play dad, which he is and was. And Dave, gets cast as this sort of Vulcan, as you say. But I don't think that's a fair sort of. I think he's hard done by, and that's one thing. He's a warm guy. He's just very professional about what he does. He does tend to say what he thinks. He doesn't suffer fools, and but the truth is the film has a touch of poetic license about it. Just to give you a bit of background, there was an original film before Last Breath, a sort of 45-minute in-house version, in which it's similar sort of talking head interviews and that kind of thing. Dave uses lines, which they quite liked, and they sort of got him to re-say them in Last Breath, but they sort of get edited down. So there's one that's gets quoted online quite a bit that he says something on the lines of he's going to fetch an inanimate object or that kind of thing, and it makes him sound a little heartless, But the truth is the full sentences, I didn't want to treat going to fetch Chris like going to fetch a friend or a colleague. I needed to put that to the back of my mind and treat him like an inanimate object. But the beauty of editing is that gets slightly misconstrued, I think, and this, by the way, I'll tell you now, it doesn't bother Dave in the slightest, because he being the professional he is, was only concerned about coming across as professional, which I think he does. And the bottom line is, from my point of view, we'll come on to what happened, but on that night in particular, you couldn't have asked for anybody better to be coming to get you. I'm sure George will second that. Somebody who's got a cool head and wasn't distracted by emotion at all, and was capable of just coming down and doing what was basically his job, and he'd be the first to say that. Do you want a flapping, emotional wreck in there with you, or do you want someone who's, maybe a little bit cooler, and that's what Dave was. Yeah, but like I said, he is a man of two faces. He's a lovely guy at home, and there we go.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's really interesting. So George, Dave really well as well, right?
Yeah, and I obviously see it from a different perspective now as a supervisor. Dave and Duncan, I've had them in my teams as a supervisor, a few times now. Dave is I think it's a bit unfair the way Dave comes across in the film, and it's obviously, as Chris quite rightly said, it's all to do with editing, because he's not really like that, and it kind of paints him in a not, in a slightly different light. But in reality, he's a bloody good diver, very professional. As a supervisor, if you've got him in your team, you're going to have an easy trip. And the same with Duncan. Where he talks a lot, but other than that, and I think Chris would agree. But other than that, they're guys, as a supervisor, they make your life easier. Not easy, easier, because if you need good, professional, strong divers that are really experienced. They know the job well, and as Chris said, when shit goes bad, which it really did that night, they're the guys you want in your team, and as a supervisor, and that's a terrible position to be in, where Craig, the supervisor, ended up. I know you're going to touch on that, so I won't go.
No, let's talk about it in a sec. So Emma, my good lady, says I'd 100% want to have someone like Dave in my team, especially in a high-pressure crisis. Go, Dave. Yeah, absolutely right. And although he comes across, you can sort of smile about the way that he comes across, which was, well, I'm just doing my job. I just had to sort this problem out, and I'm just doing it. It's very matter of fact. That's a good thing, in a crisis, being able to hold it together and not be rushing around like a crazy person, because that's not the environment for that anyway. But let's explain. So you steam like 12 hours off Aberdeen. So you're right in the middle of nowhere, literally about halfway across the North Sea. You're in the middle of nowhere, and the job is to go down and work on a manifold, right, Chris?
On the night in question, you mean? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So exactly that. We were working about 90 miles east of Aberdeen, I think, in a place called the Huntingdon Manifold. So that sort of 90 miles east puts you pretty much in a spine. Most of the oil fields in the North Sea are running a spine down the middle between sort of the UK and Norway. It's a bit of a generalisation, but that's the most of them. So yeah, we're about as far from land as you can be in the North Sea, I suppose. But we were working inside what's called a manifold. So it was a series of oil wells inside a sort of protective structure. This thing's about 10 meters high, maybe 25 meters long. So like a sort of big house. And we were, for us on that night, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and it was a real sort of very much a normal day at the office, was how we normally describe it. We were doing a bit of pressure testing, and we were basically removing a section of pipe work to replace it. The water was actually pretty clear that night. It was the kind of work that it's pretty run of the mill for us, nothing unusual. So we certainly, we had no sort of inclination at all of what was to come that night. It felt run of the mill, if you like.
So, dynamic positioning. Kev's big on health and safety and shared something, as I am, of course, as well. But Kev's going to share some stuff later, certainly around some of the investigation and questions and bits and bobs. And Kev, if you want to come in, if you've got questions that are relevant to what we're talking about, just give me a shout. And I want you to get involved if you want to get involved here, because otherwise, me, I'll just keep going. But dynamic positioning. So that's basically something that locks you, layman's terms, locks you over the top of the manifold or top of the site where you need to be, and then the bell comes down out of that, down towards the seabed, and then you've got your umbilical that then you go down, and that's when you start doing your work on the manifolds. That's a layman's terms, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it, really. Yeah, it's people always assume perhaps that you drop anchors and things because it's it's essential for two divers working on a seabed, but the boat remains in one geographical position essentially. But dropping anchors isn't always feasible in deep water. We also need to move the boat around all the time, and also there are lots of very expensive, and dangerous things on the seabed that you wouldn't want to drop an anchor onto. So the solution is, as you rightly said, this thing called a dynamic positioning system, which uses sort of GPS and then beacons on the seabed and things called taut wires, which are basically weighted wires, and their angle of inclination is fed back to a central computer on the bridge. So all these various sources of information are fed back, and they're basically telling this computer how the boat is being affected by the wind and the waves and the current, the tides, and the computer processes all that and instructs the various thrusters and propellers around the boat to counteract those basically, and allows the boat, to stay in one position with pretty remarkable accuracy, really. As a diver on the seabed, you can sort of have a big 25-ton load on a crane, for example, and you can ask the ship to move 12 meters on 237 degrees, and it will very serenely do that, even in reasonably extreme weather. So it's a fantastic system when it works. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, on the night in question, it all went to shit. So
that's one way of putting it. Yeah.
It's technical. If that was in the report, then, or if it wasn't,
that's exactly how to put it. Yeah.
Let's put it in the report. If you need me, you know where to find me. Craig is the dive supervisor on the night. George, you can obviously, you're the one person on this call that completely can relate to what Craig must have felt when those alarms started to come on, particularly as it went sort of amber and then red very, very quickly.
We in any dive control or in any diving boat, you've got the DP system, as Chris just explained, and when everything is up and running and it's all been checked, we have a series of we just call it the DP traffic lights, really. And it's a red, amber, and green. When you've got a green light, it's basically everything is good. We've got good, solid positioning, and we can go diving. So for Craig or for any supervisor to see anything other than a green is not what you want to see, basically, because an amber light is essentially saying that we're holding position, but there's a problem with some aspect of the system. And it could be a million different things that could throw up an amber light. But that essentially would be, for me as a supervisor, if I see an amber light, you're reporting everything and you are going to recover the divers.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you see an amber often or not? No.
Never.
No.
You know, I mean, it's a massive deal on a DP boat, especially a diving boat, which requires really accurate DP. Positioning. I mean, all the boats that work in the North Sea have dynamic positioning, but their accuracy, it doesn't matter as much because they're not got divers working underneath them. So, you know, it's really important we have really solid positioning, and it's within a meter. You know, we might have a footprint of a meter. You know, rough weather, it might be 2 or 3 meters, but you know, that's pretty bloody good. You know. So for Craig on the night, or any supervisor, but particularly Craig, you know, to see an amber light, you know, that's not what you want to see, and you most definitely don't want to see a red light, because that means shit is really going to go bad, because that means you no longer have positioning, and more often than not, they might not even have control of the ship by that stage. So. Which is essentially what happened, you know, the night of Chris's incident. You know, they had an amber light because they had an issue on the bridge. They didn't know what it was at that point, but it obviously all unfolded very quickly. Then, you know, the bridge pressed and gave a red light because they basically lost control of the ship. You know, and it's a big ship, and they no longer had any sort of control over it.
Was it something like 8,000 tons of steel or something? I read somewhere.
It's a you know, what?
5,000 unladen, yeah, 8,000.
Yeah, it's a big ship, you know.
James is saying, yeah, it sure did. I think you might know. He says it sure did all go to shit.
Yeah.
We've got a few. Matt is saying good stuff, lads. I think you might, maybe you know Matt, I'm not sure. And quick question says, what was the sea temperature and visibility on the night?
I think sea temperature was about 4 degrees. We think down at the very bottom. It was 91 meters that night, so about 4 degrees. And then visibility was actually fairly good. That wasn't really a factor that night. It was unusually good. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you what it was, but yeah, probably 7 or 8 meters of visibility, which is more than we'd normally have. Yeah.
So dynamic positioning sounds like a brilliant idea, as you say, Chris, when it works, right? And so there you are, and there's an 18-foot swell on the surface. So there's some big waves going on, right? But all you dive people, you reliably inform me that isn't that bad, and the ship can hold in that kind of weather reasonably okay, or you know, with a green light, it can stay in position normally, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you weren't able to work in those sort of conditions, you would never get anything done in the North Sea. So it's I mean, that was I think about maybe a 35 knot wind, I think, that night. So that's edging towards the point at which we might consider stopping diving. Is that fair to say, George? You know, it was it's still well within the bounds. Sorry, George.
Yeah, once you start, and it depends. You know, we watch the weather forecast. You know, particularly obviously the bridge. They're in charge of the ship. So, and as dive supervisors, we check. You know, when we come on shift, it's one of the first things we'll do is, you know, get a weather report. And the offshore weather is generally pretty accurate. Generally, you know, I mean, it's obviously a little bit hit and miss, but it's pretty accurate. But once you're doing 35 knot winds, and it depends whether it's an increasing forecast. But you know, you're going to be starting to, if there's an increasing forecast, you're going to be thinking about diving on the head at 40 knots. The other thing is our cranes go out of limits with 40 knot winds. You can't use the cranes on the boat because they have wind limits.
Yeah.
So, you know, that doesn't always stop us working, but if it is, you know, a job that requires the cranes, then 40 knots is going to stop you anyway.
So let's pick up then. So Chris, there you are. You're down there. You go off. You're diver 2. You go off into the darkness. You got your umbilical, and your umbilical is basically everything, right? It's warm. It's warm water to keep you warm, obviously. Oxygen to keep you breathing. Anything else that goes through the umbilical?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is an umbilical. It's a lifeline, and it gives you everything, all the services you need to survive. So yeah, breathing gas, hot water. We saw of we wear a fairly loose fitting wetsuits, nothing sophisticated at all, but it sort of has a sort of network of almost like garden hoses, like an irrigation system for your garden. So it pumps hot seawater around you to keep you warm, and it works very well. It's like being in a jacuzzi really when you're down there. But yeah, there's also an electric cable which gives you power for a torch and a camera which sit on your hat. There's also what we call a reclaim hose. So because that gas that we breathe heliox, a mixture of helium and oxygen, but helium is a very expensive gas, so it's too expensive just to breathe out into the water. So it's sort of recycled by having it sucked back up to the ship. So there's that hose as well, a sort of strengthening cable and things. So it's a pretty thick thing. It's a good maybe 2 or 3 inches thick, the sort of bundle of cables which comes down to you. But yeah, that basically provides you with an essentially infinite supply of everything you need, and that's the luxury of saturation diving. There aren't any real time limits apart from getting tired and legal. As George said, we're sort of legally limited to 6 hours in the water, but there's no other reason really that you couldn't dive 24 hours a day, really. Yeah.
There was a question. There was a question earlier actually from Gary, and I wanted to come to it. Now Gary's a good friend and another coaching client as well. 6 hours underwater working seems like a long time to be working in such a risky environment. How tiring is the shift, and how much rest do you get between?
Yeah, I mean it's a fairly long time. It can pass quite quickly. It kind of depends what you're doing. There can be days when you are doing slightly technical work, or you might just be sitting there watching gauges, or you're not doing anything particularly physical, and 6 hours is nothing really. And there are days when you might be swimming mid-water and finning away and lugging heavy, hitting things with big hammers, and 6 hours can seem like an extraordinarily long time on days like that. So yeah, it's like any job really. It has good days and bad days, but yeah, it's we work a 24-hour shift pattern, so it used to be different, but nowadays you work 6 hours in the water. As George said, that's about an 8-hour bell run. That's the time it takes to get down there and come back, and then you normally have whatever's left in the air. So 16 hours off. Yeah.
All right, so you spend 16 hours back in the chamber on the ship, and then and you again. Oh, I see. Okay, fine. And is there drinking water involved in that, or are you down there kind of?
Yeah, there is. It actually didn't used to be. Yeah, when I first started diving. Sorry, George, go on.
Well, what I was going to say is, I mean, the lads have to have a minimum of 12 hours off after a dive. That's the minimum. That has to be a minimum of 12 hours. We can't use the team before that. And we've now, legislation has changed very slightly in regards to drinks breaks, where actually you have to have a drinks break now. Before 4 hours is up, it's between 2 after the second hour and before the fourth hour. So you have to go back to the bell for a drink. Generally 15 minutes, and it's you go in, take your hat off, have a drink and a bit of a chill for 15 minutes, whatever, and then back out and back to it.
So I need to get onto the dramatic bit as well in a minute, because it's all amazing stuff. I need to get onto the dramatic bit, but I do love my wife. She's absolutely awesome. Prepare yourself for this question, Chris. She loves the question. She loves the question, does Emma? Prepare yourself for this question, Chris. You ready?
Yeah.
There we go. What about if you get an itch on your nose or your eyes?
It's a very good question. Yeah.
Good question.
Well, you're. I don't know what the language is. You're fucked basically, aren't you? There's nothing you can do about that. Yeah. I wish I had an easy answer for you, but no. You have like a little nose piece. So you've got this, because the helmet's out here, and you have a nose piece which you can push in to sort of make a seal over your nose, so when you're diving down it helps you to equalize. So that's probably the only weapon you have against in a fight against an itch. So you can spend a lot of time doing that and trying. But if you're very brave, I suppose you could put your hand up your neck down, but I was never brave enough for that.
Yeah. So look, let's keep going with this, right? So all of a sudden Craig's, well, actually, is it Michelle or is it Michael or Michelle, the DP officer on the documentary? So he says there's an alarm I've never seen before. So the DP is starting to malfunction, shall we call it? Craig's saying he's never had a red light, and all of a sudden I'm jumping here, but you get a message, Chris, to say get off the structure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, the first thing we heard was the alarm. The alarm itself. We have a sort of an open line of communication to the dive supervisor when you're in the water. What you can usually hear is people, the dive supervisor plus anybody in the background who wants to, slag a diver off as they're walking past, which is their want and will. But you do hear alarms all the time. There's sort of oxygen alarms and carbon dioxide alarms and all sorts of things going off quite regularly. And we operate what's called a twin bell system. So we have 2 diving bells on our boat. And so when the second bell is about to be launched with your sort of replacement team, if you like, they test the alarm. So you do hear them all the time. But so it wasn't really, when we did hear those, they sounded maybe louder than normal, but that wasn't really panic inducing in itself. But it was more the way Craig was telling us. He told us very quickly, make your way out of the structure, get yourself back to the bell. And, something about his tone of voice, which told us, I didn't really understand what was going on particularly, but I knew something was afoot and that we weren't messing about. This wasn't a drill, if you like. But it definitely wasn't. We weren't definitely panicking at that stage. He told us just to put our tools down, which we did, and we made a fairly orderly exit, if you like, from the structure we were working in. We can often work in very intricate structures, if you like, so structures with a lot of snagging hazards, because we'll probably come on to this in a bit, but we have this mantra in diving is to protect manage your umbilical at all times, and you constantly need to be aware of where that is, because that is, as we discussed earlier, is your lifeline. And if you lose that, as I'm about to demonstrate, you're in serious trouble. So we're always conscious every sort of second of every dive of where that is, or you certainly should be. So we both take our umbilicals in our left hand, Dave and I. Dave was maybe a couple of meters ahead of me, towards the exit, if you like. And we sort of made our way out, making sure that those umbilicals didn't catch on anything as we left. But that was all fairly orderly. We sort of dropped down to the seabed, basically expecting to see the diving bell directly in front of us. The diving bell sits normally about maybe sort of 6, 7, 8 meters above the seabed, and as I said, it was a fairly clear visibility day there, so we had been able to see it from the job when we left, if you like. But it wasn't there, and that was disconcerting. But again, not that unusual. It's not unusual not to be able to see where that diving bell is. But what we did notice that were our umbilicals, which had been trailing fairly straight back to the diving bell, were going directly behind us and back over the top of this structure we'd been working in. So again, we're getting entreated at all times to make our way back to the bell, not really understanding what was going on. But one thing we haven't perhaps touched upon too much is the fact that when you're saturation diving, there is literally only one safe haven. The only place you can go for refuge, if you like, is the diving bell. When you're scuba diving, it's never wise to rush to the surface, but that is an option, and you take your chances. But in saturation diving at that kind of depth, when your tissues are physically saturated with inert gases, compressed inert gases, that would result in explosive decompression, the bends, and in an explosive fashion, and all sorts of blockages to your arteries and the flow of blood and gas to your brain. So it'd be catastrophic. It's not something that ever enters any saturation diver's head. It's just not thought. So sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but basically, that means you've only got one thought in your head at that point, and that is get back to the bell. And the easiest way to do that is to follow your umbilical, because that's where it leads. So both Dave and I. Go on, Mike.
Yeah, so the umbilical is basically the other side of this house side. Also, the umbilical is now where you've gone one way, and now the umbilical is now behind you and above or over the top of the structure again.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's wrapping. I don't know where it's going, but I can see that it's going in the opposite direction. It's wrapped over the top of this sort of 10-meter high structure. So the only option we have at that point is to climb our own umbilicals to make our way.
We should explain the reason for that is that the boat has shifted by 200 feet.
Well, it's beginning to, yeah. So they've suffered, this deep dynamic positioning system we talked about. As basically, those alarms represented a catastrophic single point failure of this dynamic positioning system. It's a system that has multiple backups, so it has a backup and then a backup to the backup, and theoretically that it shouldn't be possible for that to happen, but it did. And so the boat had effectively, they'd lost all control of it, and it was, I think Craig, calls it a sailboat, which is what it was in that wind and weather, which wasn't a sort of causal factor, if you like, of what happened, but it definitely exacerbated it, because in that wind and waves, the boat was being pushed away at a fair rate away from us. So yeah, that's what's pulling the umbilicals. And
the boat is obviously pulling the bell, and the whole thing's moving along, and your umbilicals are going over the structure. So you now have to go back, retrace your steps in the darkness or whatever, following your umbilical to get back to the bell. That's where you think you're going, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So the bell hangs on a wire directly below the ship. So as the ship moved away, the bell, exactly as you put it, gets dragged away. And we've only got a maximum of 50 meters of umbilical on that day. Anyway, we had the 50 meters of umbilical. So once the boat gets 50 meters away, we're going with it. Assuming everything's in a straight line. So yeah, yes, exactly that. So you follow your umbilical, because that's your route to home and to safety. And we both climbed to the top of the structure, and inevitably Duncan and the bell is coming up on our umbilicals, but there's only so much you can do when we're climbing them. So I left, we both left basically a loop of umbilical behind us, if you like. So once I get to the top of mine, there's a loop. And as I said, we're constantly considering our umbilicals. So the first thing I do is turn to make sure that loop doesn't catch on anything, and with unbelievable speed, really, I noticed where the umbilical was being pulled away, and it had tightened around this. It was what's called a transponder bucket, which I won't bore you with what that is, but it's basically a metal outcrop on the side of this structure. The film sort of, you see a little bit of a little bit of footage of that in it, but that sort of is kind of slightly looped, so it belies just how quickly it happens. And I think at that point I realised very, very quickly that I was in trouble, because it had sort of snared underneath and become trapped. And even as I dived down to try and shift it or loosen it, I realised very quickly that that wasn't going to happen. And I'd effectively, again, I think as Craig puts it better than I do, but effectively I'd become an anchor at the end of an 8,000-pound ship at that point. Yeah.
Is there a quick release on it? So, like, say if when it got snagged, you could have let it go, and then you would have had your tanks to be able to go back with Dave. Is that something that's available?
No, is a short answer. No, it's not. It's you would have to physically cut the umbilical if you wanted to if you wanted to release yourself from it. Yeah, it's attached to a carabiner. Yeah, it's not. I mean, there are systems with quick releases to the gas hose, but certainly not to the whole thing. The integrity of that is very important. And that's very securely fastened to you. Yeah.
So you get caught on this manifold, and you've also told me, and I think this is the moment. You've also told me that no one has ever asked you this question. So
I was hoping you wouldn't bring it up after all, Mark. But go on.
prepare yourself, old chap, because here it comes. All right. Yeah. Was this your fault, Chris?
Yeah. But I talked to Mark about this briefly a couple of nights ago, and that's what I said. I've done sort of, I don't know, almost hundreds of these sort of discussion things and presented to various places. No one has ever been brave enough to say what seems to me like an obvious question. Yeah. Was it your fault? I only thought of it because George, it's quite rare that I do these kind of things with a colleague, or with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, so I can pretty much bluff anything, So yeah, was it my fault? I don't know. It's hindsight's obviously a beautiful thing, and if I was in the same position again, I would have made sure it didn't catch. But I honestly don't believe I could have done anything about it. It was just the side of the bucket that I happened to get up, and the speed it was going away from me. Yeah, I'm sort of people sort of ask me, you were brave. People say, you're brave and to go back and that kind of thing, which is complete nonsense to me. It was, it was my job. But the one thing that would have stopped me going back would be had I felt I was responsible, for what happened. I suppose that's not to say that with 10 or 12 years down the line, I would be more experienced and maybe deal with it slightly better. I'm not really sure is the truth to the answer. Yeah, it does gnaw at me occasionally, and I worry more that other people think that. But like I say, no one's ever been brave enough to point that finger at me. Yeah.
I'm happy.
I need to know what George thinks. Yeah.
Yeah, George. Yeah, I'm first of all, I'm happy to take that mention to be the first.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I think
take the knife out of my back now. Yeah.
You should give yourself a massive pat on the back, Mark. You know, is it Chris's fault? No, I mean it's you just can't say what you know what. As Chris said, hindsight, you know, it's a wonderful thing. You know, did you have too much umbilical? I mean, these are the questions that I could ask as someone that definitely knows, you know, the job. Did you have too much umbilical out? There's so many factors that, you know, that affect it. But it's not Chris's fault that the ship pissed off, is it? You know, I mean, that's the one thing. That process of the ship moving off and being uncontrolled, you know, really, you know, that's no one's fault, you know. So whether Chris could have done something different, I mean, Dave obviously went up a slightly different part of the structure where that piece of steel that Chris is talking about wasn't there, you know. I don't think you could really say it was Chris's fault. You know, I don't think you can do that because there's so many massive factors involved in it. You know,
and we don't, you know, in health and safety and all that kind of stuff, we don't do blame. You know, it's not about blame. You know, and it's very much about responsibility.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, yes, we do. There's something, Mark. We work in a no blame culture, and then you fuck up. And then someone's to blame.
Yeah. Me and Kev hear you. Me and Kev hear you from that for sure. So let's go back to that. Right. So you know you're in trouble. The umbilical. I mean, the sound that it makes on the documentary, I can only assume is real because what I'm seeing is real. I don't know if they've dubbed that on or anything like that. I don't know. But the bottom line is that sound of each of those kind of dunk, 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 each of those things breaking. Is that real? And then what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of a delay before that. The first thing, the umbilical sort of stretching, inexorably as the boat moved away, and I lost my. I think the first thing to go was my sort of that electronics cable we were talking about, and the communications cable we call it, and I think that must have snapped or got stretched to the point of no return inside the umbilical. So it was like a jack being pulled out the back of a speaker. Suddenly I'm plunged from having somebody talking in my ear and telling me what's going on to absolutely nothing, which is that's slightly panic inducing in itself. And then the next one to go was the gas hose. So I think before the umbilical snapped, the gas hose must have been tensioned to a point where it was either kinked or it had broken inside, and I lost the supply of breathing gas to my hat, which for the best of us is obviously a panicky moment. But as a diver, you sort of train for that. We all sort of go through drills with that kind of thing. And as you touched upon earlier on, we carry these sort of supply a twin set, we call them, so 2 scuba bottles basically on our back with an emergency supply of gas, which is open with a knob on the side of our helmet. So I sort of opened that up. But that puts you in a very different world. That world, you've gone from a world where you have this infinite supply of gas that we talked about before to one where you're a very, very finite amount of gas. The film sort of makes a big deal of 5 minutes, but if you do the maths truthfully, it's probably about 9 minutes actually of gas that I had in there. But that's it. You're on a clock at that point. But yeah, after that, the sort of the umbilical stretch, and I don't remember hearing the sound particularly. That's not a memory I have. That Dave does. He at that point, just before it snapped, we had this sort of strange, almost cinematic moment where we were face to face, because he's, as we described, he's limited by a 50-meter umbilical, so he's sort of been pulled away, but he did turn to try and get back to me and help me, but he only managed to get within maybe 2 or 3 meters of me, so close enough for us to sort of look face to face. And I sort of me imploring him to give me a hand, and him sort of almost apologetically saying I can't, and then he was like almost like a film, he was pulled away into the darkness, and his hat light sort of disappeared, never to see him again. And he himself was in no small amount of danger. He's been dragged behind a boat that's been completely lost of control, and there's all kinds of structures and things down there that he could clatter off, and but he distinctly remembers that sort of shotgun bang of the massive tension on that umbilical being released.
I mean, that moment, obviously, it is cinematic. The 2 eyes meet and you can't speak, so you've got the only communication is for your eyes. I mean, being completely honest, although you're trying to keep as calm as possible, clearly, And we've done your e-colors as well, and you came out as very blue-green, which is a lot more kind of steady-paced and a lot more kind of thoughtful and not so fast-paced and dull. Yeah. I've never called it Survivor for Disaster. There you go. Have that levels. Right. So, but my point is that you've come out with a certain personality type that keeps you quite a bit calmer, and I wonder really because you said the word panic a couple of times, and obviously there's anxiety and stuff like that going on, but you've been trained. Clearly you wouldn't be down here if you didn't know what you were doing. Tell me. I saw that.
50-50, but yeah, go on.
Tell me really, or tell us really, what was going through your mind at that, is that moment?
Yeah, no, I will never make a secret of it, and I defy anyone to be anything different, but complete and utter panic. Yeah, it was extremely frightening. I mean, when the umbilical snapped, I was caught on the top of the structure at the time, and I remember my sort of first worry that was my legs were splaying a bit. Well, I was being pulled into the structure, and I thought, first of all, my legs were going to break was my first thought, and then my second thought was the umbilical was sort of caught around this very small gap, and I thought, as it's being edged towards it, I'm gonna go through there as well, and that, like being pulled through a cheese grater, and that obviously wouldn't have been a nice way to go. But yeah, when it snapped, I sort of, because of that enormous tension, I fell backwards to the seabed like a sort of upturned turtle on my back, and found myself in this most complete and absolute darkness. I literally couldn't see a hand in front of my face. And though I'd probably only fallen maybe 2 or 3 meters away from this structure, which is like a massive house, I had absolutely no idea where that was or what direction it was in. But yeah, this 100%. I'm panicking. I'm breathing very, very hard. I don't really know what's going on, and I'm very scared. I won't deny that. And I was lucky. I got up, and I'm still thinking I've got to get back to the diving bell. As I said, that's your only option. And I literally put my hands out in front of me and took a couple of steps in hope more than expectation, having no real idea. It's easy to get lost down there at the best of time with a light and a compass, and George in my ear telling me which way to go. It's still easy to go in the wrong direction. Whereas there, it was just complete pot luck, and one of the many enormous doses of good fortune I had was I bumped straight back into the structure after a couple of spaces.
Because that was the moment. That was actually the moment that Kev brought to my attention. Do you remember, Kev?
Yeah.
Do you remember you basically said to me, "There's this story of this guy." And the bit you were talking about was we were talking about luck versus the law of attraction versus like in moments in life where you're just not sure, but you take a leap of faith almost, and you go for it. And that was the moment you said to me, there's this story about this guy. And by the way, you look at you sitting right next to him now having a chat, right? There's this story of this guy who basically, was on the ocean bed, couldn't see where he was going, and literally just walked out, hands first. I mean, how did you feel when you saw that, Kev?
It just blew me away. I mean, did you have a rough idea of where it could be, or was it just blind luck and a pure guess?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was as black as you can imagine. Yeah, absolutely disorientated. No idea. Yeah.
So no backup light on your helmet. Nothing. Just dark.
All the power's gone, I guess, isn't it?
I know. It could have been a backup battery on there or something to, So you just stand up and choose a direction and walk.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, like you're going for a piss in the middle of the night. You put your hands out in front of you and hope for the best, don't you? That you're gonna,
me getting up for a pee in the night is nothing like that, Chris. I'm telling you. I've actually got a little stormtrooper nightlight on my toilet to guide me, but I think you could have done.
I'll be recommending that as soon as we get back. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, just the pure luck of that, and that is genuinely, lucky, because like you said, you would have walked off into no man's land potentially, and if you'd have kept walking and not walked into the structure, well, that's it. It's over, right?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, a big deal's made of that sometimes, but yeah, I mean, it certainly rendered, finding a structure and being able to climb to the top and put myself in the middle of it made it easier, for the rescue. It's not to say that had I walked off into no man's land, at the end of the day, I had a beacon on me. They were tracking that beacon on the bridge, so they would have found me eventually, but it would have been much more difficult for the ROV to find me. And they were just working off range, and they lost all the navigation screens. They were just working off range and bearing from a radar, pretty much. So yeah, it could have definitely delayed things. It would have meant lowering the bell into a dangerous position below the level of any of the structures, which is a sort of cardinal rule in diving, that we never lower it below the structures, because that could act as an anchor effectively and jeopardize the whole ship. So yeah, there's a whole matter of things that made it better that I was on the top of the structure. But yeah,
just one thing to add that is that to do the rescue would have been considerably harder, as Crystal touched on, had he not been on the top of the structure, because you would have had to find him and then put the vessel in a position where they could get to him, and if that was right across the other side, it was bad enough they were, to get the ship back in position anyway.
Yeah,
but it could have been. It definitely could have been a different outcome. I think. I think it was definitely a factor in the fact that Chris survived it. It was because of just absolute abject luck that he managed to get himself on the top of the structure, which made, you saw the footage. The ROV came up to the structure and found Chris straight away. So that could have been 10, 15 minutes, obviously.
Exactly right, and I get that, George. And let's come on to that. So basically, you're in panic mode. You find this structure. You have to climb a few meters up to get onto the top of it. You get yourself up there. You're looking around for the bell. There's nothing. What else do you remember from those sort of moments onwards?
I feel I remember pretty much all of it. Exactly like you said. I sort of climbed to the top, and I remember fully expecting to see the diving bell there above me somewhere, or Dave on his way back to get me, or Duncan, for some reason. But yeah, there was just nothing, not a speck of light in the sea above me. And when you talk about panicking, that was sort of a strange moment for me, really, because I think at that point, I got to the top and I could see nothing, so I was sort of clinging onto the grating on the top of the structure, mainly so the current wouldn't wash me off, or I wouldn't fall off the side, because I couldn't really tell where that was. But I remember sort of roughly doing the maths, thinking, I've got 7, 8, 9 minutes, something like that, in this bailout, and I've used a fair bit up already. Scrambling around on the seabed, climbing up, breathing hard, and in a panic, and therefore I can't possibly have much time left. And even if Dave had been right in front of me, ready to sort of lift me back up to the bell and put my head into a breathable environment, I sort of remember thinking, I don't think there's enough time. So I didn't give up hope at all, but I definitely resigned myself to the fact that fairly quickly this was going to be it, and that in itself had did have a very calming effect.
Well, hold that thought, Chris. Hold that thought, because I want to come back to that, because the film's very clever with this. The film's very clever with this bit of editing as well, because what it's doing then is all this has happened, and then it cuts to them trying to get back to you. So I'd like to cover a bit of that, and then I'd like to come back to like your train of thought, right? So basically, as George said, they send this ROV down there with lights and a camera on it, and it's a little vehicle basically, and they get eyes on you very, very quickly, despite the fact the boat is like 200 meters away or whatever, and they're all scrambling to try and get everything back online, to bring it back, to get the bell back, to get everything back to where you are. But they've got the ROV, and so they can see you. There's lights on you, and the footage is unnerving. The footage is like, one of them even says like he's waving to us, like you can see us, he's waving to us. Could you see the ROV at all?
So no, so that's that happened later. So those moments on the top were sort of a precursor to that. I was unconscious long before the ROV. Well, not long, but fair. We'll never really know. We'll never really know how long I was conscious for, is the truth, because there is no footage of that. But yeah, you're right. So the boat had they completely lost control. The captain had been dragged out of his bed, and he and the chief officer were trying to manually direct the vessel, and they have 4 joysticks, so they're facing each other, trying to control the thrusters manually, which they've never really had to do before. It's a system really that's designed to nudge the boat into a quayside in a very calm port, and what they're berthing.
Wow.
That on top of that, they had absolutely no frame of reference. It was 10 o'clock at night in September, so it's dark. All their navigation screens had gone black. We're not anywhere near an oil rig or anything like that, so they had absolutely no way of referencing where I was or where anything else was. Very, very disorientating. And the best they managed really was to try and get the bow into the prevailing weather, to steady the ship a little bit. In terms of bringing the boat back to my position, they simply couldn't. There's a sort of snail trail of their efforts. Not to cast any aspersions on them at all, but they're in an extremely difficult situation. And but it's it's like spaghetti junction really. They're not really making any progress towards me. But yeah, so they get to and eventually they end up nearly 250 meters away. But we have described an ROV on the boat, which has a tether or a cable of 300 odd meters. So that was able to get back to me long before the ship was able to return to my position, and that's how we have that sort of pretty haunting footage, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, how do you feel when you watch that footage back?
Yeah, same as anyone else. You feel slightly disassociated from it, I think, as the person involved. I'm like anyone else. It's kind of slightly haunting and strange to watch, isn't it? And I wonder if he makes it.
Yeah. I wonder if he makes it. Hang on, it's me. Yeah. I mean, there's also a little bit in there as well, which is like the IT man's dream, where they basically switch it all off and then switch it all back on again, and it starts to work, right? Is that fair to say?
That's exactly what it was, really. So the ship's crew are Norwegian, they're principally Norwegian anyway in our boat. It's a Norwegian vessel. So they call that the Swedish solution, it's a local insult. Apparently the Swedes call it the Norwegian. So when you don't know what to do, you just turn it off and you turn it on again. Yeah. But I mean, on a more serious note, people often ask, a question often get asked is, why didn't they do that before? Why did it take 40 minutes for them to make that decision? But the answer to that is that they, this was, as it was for all of us, a situation, as George said, we don't see red lights, we don't see amber lights, never mind red ones. And they'd never had to manually control the vessel in those kind of conditions. We never had to face anything like this, really. And my understanding is the captain's principal worry was that, if he were to reset the system, they might return with less than, at least they had manual control at that point. And his worry was they turn it off and nothing comes back, and now we are dead in the water. So, it's one of those things that's quite easy to judge for people, on internet, banging out on the Facebook or whatever. But that's it was a very, very difficult and pressurized situation for them too. So yeah.
I heard a great quote once that opinions are like arseholes. Everyone's got one.
Yeah,
everyone's got one. So I've got a few quotes on this. So Jenna's joined us. Jenna's saying this is such an incredible story and thank you for sharing. James says God was watching you that night, mate, and everyone on the boat as well. One lucky man for sure. Gary said, have you had any incidents that have required you to get back to the bell so quickly? That's quite a good question, actually, and probably not as quickly. But
I'll answer that one for you in a second. There was, but go on.
Okay, all right. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in a moment. But here's the thing. So the quotes I saw about the film. From the BBC and blah, 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 blah. And by the way, you've been on this morning and now you're on Straight Talking with us. Right? So,
it's a big time now, I know that.
Which one's more fun, Chris? Which one's more fun? And it is big time because George is here, right? So the quotes about the film are tense, gripping, terrifying, all those kind of words. And this is the moment. This is the moment when, it's all hit the fan. Duncan's in the bell and he's praying. All the umbilicals all come back in. It's all snapped and it's all gone. And he's in bits, in his own words, shitting himself. They switch it on. They do a hard reset, switch it off and switch it back on again. And then they've got the ROV there. You're not consciously aware of that or anything like that. They finally get back into position. 35 minutes in total before Dave can get to you.
Yeah, I think about 35 minutes before Dave was able to come down and execute the rescue. That's right. Yeah, before they were securely in position. I mean, the captain had apparently said that had they not been able to reset the dynamic position system, they probably wouldn't have come to get me because he wouldn't have risked putting the bell anywhere near me, in an uncontrolled fashion, if you like. So about 35 minutes, which, as I said, we'll never really know exactly how long my emergency gas lasted. To me, it certainly seemed to last a lot longer than I thought it was. I was constantly expecting it to run out. But something like that. So that there's a sort of a window of, and by the time Dave gets me back to the bell, it's probably 40 minutes. So it's probably a window of 29, 30 minutes with nothing to breathe, basically. Yeah.
So Dave says, very matter of fact. Got to love Dave. We all need a Dave. Dave says very matter of fact. When I got back to the manifold, I wasn't surprised. I saw a dead guy on the top of the manifold. Very matter of fact, isn't he? But he's just like, well, this is my job. And you're 6'5", and so I mean, you said you're pretty thin. You're a skinny chap, but that's still a fair weight of a human being in all that gear to try and get all the way back to the bell.
Yeah, well, I was skinny when I was 16. Yeah, definitely less so now. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Dave is he's a sort of he's a very, very fit guy. He's sort of got great upper body strength. He's sort of like a rock climber sort of physique. He's the kind of guy who does chin ups in the chambers on the baseballs, that kind of thing. So very athletic, and and even he found it a massive physical struggle to get me back. We normally have an element of buoyancy in our gear, so we have a jacket that we can inflate in order to make us a bit lighter, because we're naturally weighted heavy, if you like, because we work on the seabed most of the time. But you can inflate your jacket normally. So both Dave and I had that facility, but mine had been severed. So the hose which inflates mine had been severed, so that wasn't a possibility for me. And Dave, in his kindness, took his inflation hose off his jacket and pushed it when he got to me. Pushed it up. We wear what's called a neck dam, which is basically a latex or a rubber seal around your neck, which forms a watertight seal to your helmet. So he pushed it up there to try and give me a supply of gas when he first got to me. So he didn't have any inflation either. So they lowered the diving bell down. As George will testify, we have a sort of cardinal rule where we always keep the bell 5 meters above any working structure, but they lowered it down to, I think, just a couple of meters above. But even at that, with the bell moving up and down in a sort of 5 meter swell, it was a monumental effort for him to get me back. And obviously, I can never thank him enough for that. I tell you right now, there's a lot of people wouldn't have managed that. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, fair play to him. Absolutely.
Did he connect to you, or essentially fireman lift you and then crawl up his own umbilical? How would he have done that?
Yeah, he carries. We all carry a sort of what we call a rescue strap, which is like a couple of mountaineering carabiners on a little lanyard. So he would have got to me, clipped one end to me, one end to himself, so he can then turn and use both his arms to drag me up. But yeah, as I'm 6'5" and weigh a little bit too much, and but I've also got a whole raft of diving gear on me, bailout bottles and helmets and tools and everything hanging off me, so a huge weight to pull back. Yeah, but yeah.
So the one thing to add there is that because it was quite rough, the sea state was quite rough that night, was that that was a real feat. It might sound quite simple. You just pull a bloke back, but when the bell is moving up and down, you become like twice as heavy because it's going away from you. So you suddenly become really, really heavy as soon as the bell moves up. So not only have you just gone really heavy, the bloke, as in Chris in this instance, has also gone really heavy, and that you've got to get them back into the diving bell. And that, like Chris just said, there's a lot of people may not have managed that. That was tough.
Yeah, and I mean, just sorry, Mark, just to add to that quickly before we carry on, but it's one of those things that the nature of the world we live in is that people want to talk to me most of the time, because I was a sort of the damsel in distress, if you like. But that really is what I was. There's kind words being written by people watching, but at the end of the day, I didn't really do anything. I lay there and I got very, very lucky. And the real heroes in this story are the people who came to get me. The calmness of the crew. But yeah, none more than Dave who put in that effort.
Emma would like me to interview Dave. So perhaps one day.
You should.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Really interesting guy. Yeah.
I'd love to meet Dave and have a chat with him. Certainly about the whole thing. So anyway, they get you back into the bell. There you are. You're back into the bell. You're a dead guy. They get you. They take Duncan's like your sat daddy. He's emotional. He's involved. He takes all your gear off. And there you are. Exposed back to a breathable environment, I guess is the way you put that. And he gives you two quick kisses of life. Blasts a bit of his oxygen into you. Explain that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember it at all, but it's apparently exactly as you described. Really, he sort of I get pulled. Dave guides me into the diving bell. Once I'm inside the what we call the trunking, which is basically a round circle at the bottom of the bell. Dave can't get in past me. I'm blocking the way in, so he's helpless outside waiting. And Duncan has an unconscious head basically sitting just above the water that's apparently lolling forward all the time, and he had great difficulty in just maintaining my airway and keeping my neck up while he got my helmet off and stuff. But yeah, apparently literally just gave me two rescue breaths, and he describes it as a massive exhalation. So instead of coming around gently, I went that, which I've been at the talk of the Royal Medical Society in London and places like that, and trying to get answers, I suppose. And they said there may have been a block, maybe the tongue being unblocked from my esophagus and reopening the airway or something like that. But yeah, essentially I come round straight away with, a miraculous rescue breath. And for me, it was a sort of foggy moments, like a gradual awakening, like being horribly drunk or something like that, and coming around slowly but surely. But, eventually I'm actually able to climb back into the bell myself, under my own steam. I think slightly oblivious to what has happened, just sit down in my chair and ask people to take my gear off, Yeah, remarkable, really.
There's an amazing moment where George's, colleague or, the equivalent, the dive supervisor kind of like comes over the radio and says, Chris, you all right, mate? And it's just this little, you just go,
yeah.
I'm all right. I mean, it's just, it blows your mind when you watch the film. You're like, unbelievable.
I don't think I appreciated then, maybe the magnitude of what had happened. Really, you don't. I've been unconscious through most of this, so I don't think I really, I remember seeing Dave crumpled in the corner of the bell, exhausted, and thinking, what's wrong with him? What's he been doing? Strange moments. I think as we were coming back up and I was starting to come around, and I knew something was afoot. I remember sort of reaching across and giving their hands a squeeze, knowing that something had happened. But yeah, very vague sort of memories of all that, really.
I think one thing is that you've got a ship with over 100 crew, 110 whatever crew, and everyone is on board to put those divers on the seabed. So every department, whether it's the bridge, the life support crew, the dive supervisors, ROV department, even the deck, everyone is affected by what happens. So it's a massive, everyone plays a massive part in putting those divers on the seabed. Well, the whole crew that's what the boat is there for. It's a diving support boat. So everyone is employed to put divers on the seabed, whether you cook the food or whether you clean the cabins or whatever. You all play an integral part. So the bridge have had a problem. They're affected by ROV is affected because they find Chris, and obviously as a supervisor, I can only begin to imagine what it was like in dive control. Where everything is run. That's basically the nerve, the heart of the ship. Would have been, that would have been that would have been affecting everyone.
And long term as well, George, wouldn't it? If the outcome had been different, that would have had an impact on everybody's career, on the company, on, notwithstanding watching, effectively sitting there and watching somebody die for 40 minutes on a screen, which is what they all had to go through. It would have had far-reaching implications for everybody involved, wouldn't it? I think. Yeah,
and especially, well, everyone. I don't think anyone's less important. But as a supervisor, no. Who knows how you deal with those things? Craig.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, obviously.
I love the fact there's a great moment where Dave, who is notoriously unemotional across, certainly in the film, as you say, it's a bit of poetic license. But he says, like, he gets back into the bell and he looks at, he thinks he's put a dead guy in there, and he gets back into the bell and he looks across and he goes, I look at Chris, and he's definitely not dead. Just so matter of fact.
I think he describes it. I can't remember if it's in Last Breath or in another film, or the previous one, or both. I can't remember. He describes it as being a little bit upset with me on the way back up. He says, like he'd lost his, your kids have wandered off, and you're glad to have gotten back, but you're upset that they put you through that.
I think he was a bit pissed off with you, wasn't he, for putting him in that.
So I do want to touch on. I mean, we've jumped ahead a little bit, but there's the really important part. You're right, George.
Yeah, I'm just dying here. Right.
Yeah, no jokes about that. But especially as I'm about to come on to that. I want to say Bob Fleming here. That's the Fast Show. Anyway, so essentially, I know you didn't die, Chris, right? Clearly, because you're in front of me, right? And I know that he put two breaths into you and kind of came round and everything else. But people talk about death and dying, and this, we have to touch on this, and I want to touch on it because nobody knows what death's like. Nobody knows. No one knows. No one can come back and tell us necessarily. You've been about as near. You've been about as near as anyone that I know, right? People talk about life flashing before their eyes, and all this kind of stuff. When people talk about these kind of potentially near-death experiences. I remember Emma said, did you speak to God, or certainly something about? I know you talked about in the film about your house. You had a sense of loss about your house not being built and not being able to marry Morag and all this other. Give us a bit more of a sense of really, just for people watching. What went on in your mind before you actually passed out and you didn't know anymore.
Yeah, it's a strange one because you're right. As you said, I didn't die, so I'm always conscious that I don't want to be melodramatic about it and make out that I suffered in some way that I didn't, because there are people every day who are given notional death sentences, if you like, through cancer diagnoses and things like that. But it's obviously, I suppose, a slightly unusual set of circumstances, and that what I thought at the time was going to be my end was going to be so close at hand, that I was maybe 4 or 5 minutes away from that being it. And sort of you touched on it there. Really, it's I don't remember feeling very angry or frightened particularly, but just massively sad and grief stricken, really, and also completely bemused and not really understanding how this was possible. That how had I found myself in this desolate, lonely place, and how was this going to be the place that I died? And naturally, I think we'd all be the same. That we think of the people at home and the people we love, and the lives we have ahead of us. I was at a relatively young age. I was 33 or something like that, 32, 33, and that stage in life where things, big things are happening. And like you said, I was getting married the following year, and we're in the process of building a house, and you've got your whole life ahead of you, haven't you? And to be there in those moments and have the time to contemplate having that all taken away from you was just very, very, very sad. And I remember feeling mostly sadness for those at home. The thought of your fiance being told, of your mother being told, your father being given that news, and the destruction and stupid stuff like oh God, what message have I got on my mobile phone that people shouldn't see? Important things like that. But you know what I mean? It's bizarre, and it's a lot. It felt like a lot of time to reflect on things like that, and the immense damage you're going to do. And I can remember. I can't remember if I said that in the film or not, but I can remember calling out in the darkness, almost screaming apologies to Morag. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for being selfish and selfish enough to put myself in this position. There's a choice in being a diver, isn't there? As George knows, that's we all wonder why we do it. Do we do it for money? Do we do it because there's a little bit of danger involved? Do we want to go home and say we're a diver? There's probably an element of all those things, and it's a career path that takes you away from home, and you like to think you're doing it for your family, but there's an element of selfishness about it, I suppose. And so I remember thinking a bit about that, and I can also remember calling out Duncan's name, which didn't make any sense because it would have been Dave coming to get me. But I think the role he played in my career at that point, and the fact that he dug me out of quite a few holes before, I can remember I was pleading with him to drop out of the darkness and save me like he always did, sort of thing. So like I said, I don't like to dwell on them too much, and
I appreciate it.
Not for personal reasons. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I don't like to. Like I said, I don't like to make out that it's more than it was, because as you said, I'm sat here perfectly healthy in front of you, So, very, very strange grief. Let's say grief-stricken moments. Yeah.
There's an interesting point, and I really do appreciate you sharing there, of course.
No.
I think that's so important. Pete's just come in with a really great question as well, which I'll come back to. Yeah, I mean, basically no side effects. You know, it's just
Well,
Chris.
No one's been brave enough to tell me otherwise. You know what I mean?
So no physical, no physical side effects. This is a great question from Pete, and then I want to come on to Stuart, the medic, at the end of the film. Pete's come in and said, Chris, how have you personally changed since? That's quite a good question. Well, it's not a question; it's a very good question, actually.
Yeah, I guess I get asked that a lot, but in some ways we covered it really. In that, you know, people often want to know if you've had some kind of epiphany. You know, do I get up each day, you know, thinking this could be my last, I'm going to make the most of it, that kind of thing. But you know, the sort of slightly dull truth is that no, I don't think I have. You know, I don't think I'd like to think I was a little bit like that before. But as I said, we sort of had this strange euphoria of getting through it, the three of us, and in a strange way, it's been a positive experience in my life. You know, it's opened a lot of opportunities. We've done a lot of things that I would never have done otherwise, and even on a professional front, it's sort of given me a confidence that perhaps I didn't have up before, because you know we extricated ourselves. I say they extricated me from a position that might have seemed impossible. So that in itself was sort of confidence building. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the truth is that life just goes on, doesn't it? You know, you still have to, you know, as I say, you still have to go and buy the milk on a Wednesday and put the bins out and stuff like that, and life soon takes over. And you know, it's not a melodrama, it's not a Hollywood film. Life goes on. I would say the only way I have changed, I would think, is you know, as I perhaps do have a slightly more acute awareness of death, I suppose. You know, I do maybe, as you touched upon them, I don't know what it's like to die, but I have maybe a little insight as to what it might be. And it wasn't a frightening one particularly. It was a calm moments falling into unconsciousness, if you like.
So that's really interesting. That calmness, you know, before you fell into the unconsciousness, and then Stuart at the end, Stuart the medic, the ship medic, the diver medic, I should say, actually, and he was like, I've never seen anything like this before in my life. I cannot believe that he's just like been down there for like 20, 25, you know, whatever minutes without oxygen essentially, and has lived. And we'll touch on the reasons that you guys all believe, and then we want to talk a little bit about the safety aspects as well, about what was learned. But the bit about the fact that Stuart said, like, I can't believe that I'm going to put him in this little bed, warm him up a little bit, you know, stick a tea cozy on his head, and he's basically going to be all right. It was like, it's mind blowing, you know, absolutely mind blowing that happens. And then, you know, I think that you reached over to him. He was leaning over to take your temperature or do something, and you just touched his arm and just said, you know, it's all right, you know. It's almost like, and Stuart took that to mean that, you know, you said, I was sad, I was a bit cold, and then it was just like falling asleep, basically. I just went into unconsciousness, which is kind of what you've said to us there anyway. But you know, was that what you meant to Stuart? I mean, or did Stuart just read into that?
Well, yeah, that's quite a difficult question. Stu is a very nice guy, yeah. I have a lot of respect for. But I'll tell you a little story about that very scene, in fact, in the film. So between us, yeah, you know, the vast majority of the footage in the film is the real thing, you know. But that footage of Stu and I doing that scene, well, that's a recreation. So we went on board the Topaz and we recreated that for the cameras. And when we were asked to do that, I was sort of laughing and joking about it, because the truth is I have no memory at all of saying that. You know, if Stu says I did, I 100% did, because, you know, he wouldn't, he's not the type to make something like that up. And I remember sort of almost mocking the situation and being a bit silly about it. And then I watched the film, you know, and then you watch Stu get very, you know, emotional about that. And, you know, you realise it meant something to us. I felt pretty guilty about having made light of it at the time. But yeah, that, you know, that, yeah, I mean, I get people get in touch with me all the time, and often I've had a lot of, it sounds terrible, widows get in touch with me quite a lot, you know, people who've lost somebody they love, and to ask, you know, what is it like to die, and you feel slightly guilty trying to give them an answer, but, you know, sometimes I'm able to, and that gives them a kind of comfort, which is nice. But yeah, I think we touched on it earlier that, you know, the what is most striking about that is the effect that something traumatic can have on other people, you know. So Stu, you know, involved not directly necessarily, but it had, you know, it's something that can make a very stoic, Inverness lad, bring a tear to his eye, and that was the case for a lot of people on board. So it's slightly humbling. I realised maybe that we perhaps were slightly flippant about things at the time, and in a weird way, making the film has opened my eyes a little bit more as to the magnitude of it, and also that it's not all about you. There were a lot of people involved, as George described, and it had as much effect on them as it did us. Yeah.
And you're now a public speaker as well. You do go out and talk about this experience from time to time. And within reason. But no, you do go out and you do. Obviously, we're doing this tonight, but you have given talks to people around the country and stuff about the incident. Right?
Yeah, I think it's not something I sort of actively pursue, but and my work's not really conducive to sort of committing to stuff. But yeah, it's something I quite enjoy doing, to be honest. And people regularly sort of come to me and ask me to do those sorts of things, and it's it's nice to pass on the message. And the bottom line is, it's a story people like to hear, and it's also a good story with a happy ending, isn't it? Which we don't get that much of these days. So it's not just a story; it's a world, and I think that's also why the film works. Is that it's a world people don't know too much about, and the film sort of gives them an insight, and hopefully I can do the same when I want to speak to them. Yeah.
No, listen, 100%. I think that's really wonderful. We have to talk about the outcomes as well, of course, and I know Kev's got a few questions as well. One of the questions that Emma actually put on my sheet, my 2 pages of notes here, is so basically you went back into the water, didn't you? You went back into the water like 3 weeks later after this incident. So you must have been checked over. They said you're fine, and you just went straight back to work. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. I mean, it was, it's a funny one. I mean, again, that's hindsight, isn't it? And, I'm a bit older in the tooth now. Everybody was great. They were very supportive. We were given the option to go back. The HSE closed us down for 3 weeks. So we were sort of given the opportunity to go back on the first rotation back, and we went back to the same place. And, we all jumped on the opportunity, really. But that was purely because, it's such a competitive industry, and I was... I thought, well, this might be career over for me, So to be given the opportunity to go back, I kind of felt I had to take it. And at the end of the day, it's my job. It's how I pay my mortgage. And what you're going to do? You're going to say, no, I'm not going back. And people say could you sued, I suppose, and made some claim, but that's just. At the end of the day, that would have been fraudulent. I was extremely lucky to suffer no injury, and I don't feel any sort of psychological damage. So why would I suppose? But yeah, the company were great, and I see George laughing a minute ago, but that's true, isn't it? It was in their interest that I went back as well. Obviously, as soon as I'm back diving, then Chris is okay, and we can all move on.
Draw a line under it.
A potentially legally difficult situation, yeah. So but that's probably maybe to do some of the disservice. They were great, and it was entirely my doing. I never even considered not going back, really. Yeah.
Well, good for you, mate. I think that's really strong. And as far as the outcomes go, Kev, you got a couple of questions you want to fire in?
Yeah, well, and going back to when you got back in the water the next time, there's a statement at the end of the movie that says, "Don't fuck it up this time, Chris." All right. Did that actually happen?
I must tell you something. Chris has already told me that off camera, but Chris, I think you should share that if you're happy to.
Does that actually happen?
Yeah, no. So that's a moment of recreation. Yes, I don't think those exact words were used. I don't think so. Okay. There was definitely, when we went back, there was a lot of piss taking. That's not beat around the bush. They were making me lie on the seabed to test beacons and things like that, and there was lots of giggling in the background, that kind of stuff. So that's what made it easy. We all laughed and joked about it all the way through, and that's what people do, isn't it? And, but yeah, when I first saw a draft of the film, I was on holiday away with Morag somewhere, and they sent us a sort of rough copy of it. And 2 things you get if you ever get the opportunity to watch a film about yourself, which in some ways I hope you don't, but it's you're hypersensitive to everything that you watch. You're constantly, do I sound like a prick? Do I sound like a prick? That's the truth of it. It's very, very selfish to first watch it. But there's 2 things struck us at the end. Both of us sat there first of all and said, Dave has been misrepresented. That was our, and I really, the people who made the film, become friends. I'm not knocking them, but that was our first instinct. And the second was, I hate that line at the end. Yeah, I hate the line at the end because there's an inference in that I did fuck up the first time, isn't it? Which we've touched upon a bit. And actually, you look at it, that just pulled a chord in me that was, because there's perhaps some truth in it, but yeah, I've since so yeah, I don't think that was a real thing that happened. I don't think anybody said that as I dropped down, but it was yeah, I've come to, I've been to see it in cinemas and everyone laughs at that way, but I laugh, and it's, I brushed it off. It's fine,
But I think basically offshore life, and particularly on a diving, well, actually it's on rigs and everywhere, but pretty much from the moment you set foot on board, the piss take is real. So it doesn't stop, and the fact that you nearly died, you are still going to get rinsed for it.
It's an absolute irrelevance.
I would say
that's more ammunition.
To this day,
I would say that's the way that a lot of people will handle it. It's like, it's actually a way for them to handle it. It's like a coping mechanism, because nobody wanted to watch you pass away in front of their very eyes. You know what I mean? Nobody wanted that. And as you say, the outcome would have been so horrible for you, for everybody. Traumatized, career, not ending, but people, you were on that ship and blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to deal with it however best you can, and if you can make light of it in that kind of way, and like, Chris, come on, Chris, sort yourself out, and that kind of piss taking. I think it is what it is. That's what we do.
It doesn't matter how serious the incident is, and obviously someone nearly dying is pretty serious. It's not a good outcome to a shift.
The office is,
is you lived, so we just get over it, haven't we?
Yeah.
What are you complaining about? You're still here, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Stop going on about it.
I mean, the one place. I mean, exactly. This is why, again, it's quite strange doing this with George, because I do this kind of thing a lot, and people are always like, give you a lot of sympathy and all this kind of thing. But the one place you get no sympathy, and that's the truth, isn't it? That's where the truth lies, is the people who know.
The one place you get no.
They realise you didn't do fuck all, just lay there.
The one place you get
lazy.
The one place you get no sympathy is on Straight Talking.
Well, yeah. First and last time, by the way, Mark. That's it.
All the gags on there, Chris, of fucking hell, he's always laying down on the job and all.
Anything to cut a bell run short, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Do anything to get out of the dive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is true. Yeah, so you can't knock that.
So further outcomes. Has there been any safety changes? Is there anything that the HSE recommended? Is there anything that the companies have adopted that's anything different? Because the incident was 2012, right?
No, nothing. I mean, obviously, well, no, essentially not. I mean, we work in a safe way.
Yes.
No, essentially not. I mean, obviously, the vessel had to go through an awful lot of testing, and there's systems being put in place to, a lot of modifications made to the DP system to stop this from happening again. And it's been, if you think that boat more often than not is working 24 hours a day, there hasn't been any issues. Obviously it highlights certain things of, umbilical management, which Chris touched on earlier, all these different things. But, I wouldn't say it really changed, because we already work in mostly and on most boats, not, I'm just generalising, but there's so much procedure in place to work in the North Sea, it's a managed risk. Obviously, putting your head underwater is about as dangerous as it can be, and do it 100 metres down where you can't come up is obviously dangerous. So the job is inherently dangerous. But there's a lot of procedure, or the whole thing is procedure based, and it's a managed risk. So, something about health and safety. Yeah. So it's a managed risk, and it's probably it's not more dangerous than working on a building site, because we make it that way, because we do things in a safe way. So there wouldn't have been a huge amount of lessons learned from it from a diving point of view, because we already work safely.
I mean, in many ways, there was a lot of bad luck for it to happen. For all of these things, that they call it like the Swiss cheese model, when everything lines up. I mean, there was like the failure of the DP. There was like the fact that everything shifted 250 meters that way. The fact that the bell, when it went over the structure, you got caught on the structure. I mean, the whole thing is just like, that's catastrophic in bad luck. And then there's a lot of good luck as well. There's a lot of other great outcomes, as in you found the manifold, you got onto the top, they managed to get back to you. It wasn't like an hour and a half before they got back to you. It was, they got back to you as quick as they could. Dave managed to get you in. Yeah, all of that. I mean, all of that is, I'm not a big believer in luck, if I'm honest. Luck is a word I don't use very often, but in this particular instance, I genuinely think that there's a case for it, because ultimately there's so many things that went a certain way that could have gone other ways.
I mean, to be honest, if I just put the whole thing as far as what happened to Chris down, it's just bloody unlucky, because had he been 1 meter over, he would have gone up the same direction that Dave did. So that's just bloody unlucky. I mean, the rest of it obviously is just is a terrible thing to happen.
Yeah,
I think it's just unlucky. I really do. It's the ship.
Go on, Chris.
Yeah, go on, Chris.
No, sorry, George, I'm interrupting. Big one. Go on, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, the ship breaking, let's just say it broke down. I mean, no one could ever have foreseen that. There's nothing you could have put in place to stop that happening, because in theory, it couldn't happen. But it did happen. And the outcome of it for Chris was just bloody bad luck. It really is. And I don't think there's not a lot of things you could put in place to stop that from happening, because it just had a chain of events that were going to run its course,
I was going to say, I think ultimately what George is saying is that ultimately, from our point of view, from the diving point of view, the diving community on the boat, it was almost a success story, wasn't it? Because what went wrong was, you sort of mentioned the Swiss cheese thing, but I'm not quite sure it was that. It was a single point. One thing went wrong. One thing went wrong. This computer system had a catastrophic single point failure. But beyond that, everything that came afterwards, the procedures, the drills that we'd done, the chain of command, everything clicked into place really very effectively. And it's really striking when you listen to the audio back from dive control and from the bridge and things like that, how serenely calm everybody is in what must have been an extraordinarily tense situation in executing what was ultimately a successful rescue of the stricken diver, basically. So yeah, it's that's not to say that we're complacent, is it, George? And I think we definitely learned a lot of stuff that night, and a lot of the stuff we learned were, I often say to people that we learned lots of little things that night in doing the rescue. So to give you stupid examples, Dave, when he was putting me back, he couldn't find any grab handles to pull me back onto the stage underneath the bell. Duncan couldn't put his hand on knives to cut my stuff off. So but what we really learned from all of that was that we perhaps hadn't been as realistic in the drills that we do. So we do diver rescue drills all the time, and in reality we probably should have learned these lessons before the night, but we perhaps hadn't, because we weren't doing these drills as realistically as we should do. So stuff like that. So maybe a slight cultural shift in the way we do things. And we've also moved on to, or we've tried to move on to rebreathers on the boat, haven't we? So sort of a different supply of emergency gas, which should give you a bit longer. So we learned little things and adjusted things. But yeah, as George said, fundamentally, it was extraordinarily bad luck, and it's very difficult. I mean, I would never suggest that we won't try to mitigate against something like that, because everything we do, isn't it, George, is hugely risk assessed. You can't climb a set of stairs on the boat without that being risk assessed. So we do everything we can at all times to try and cover ourselves. But yeah, sometimes something
you also had some great footage of you on the boat, and I'm guessing it wasn't just from this one trip. I'm sure it was you're doing like selfies outside the captain's thing, and you obviously done a lot of footage of you on the boat, showing inside the inside the chambers and everything else. So the film was actually very well put together, with a lot of information of you up close and personal, if you like.
Well, that's right. So I'll let you in on the cinematic secret there. So they sort of made out that I sent videos home to Morag all the time. That's just not true. Just not in my nature. So they had this slight problem, but they made the decision to hold me back in the film, so they don't. Those who get to see it, I do survive. If you haven't seen it, I do make it. They don't reveal that until about 2/3 of the way through the film, do they? So they had to find a way of you getting to know me, I suppose. So we faked a lot of that. So all that is a bit, me going around, captain's cabin, all that kind of thing. It's just all, it's all bullshit.
They even kind of they forced the language for the first half, at least, to say that to allude to that you didn't make it. You know,
Yeah, I didn't know. Sorry, Kevin. Beg your pardon.
So I found that quite strange. You know, it was Yeah.
I don't know. So did I. It jarred when I saw it, but you know, I thought there's just no way people are going to buy that I haven't made it, and people are going to cotton on. But people do seem to go when I walk out. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, a lot about the film. A lot about the film. We sort of realise, you know, you've come to learn why they did it, and they're actually quite good at what they do. Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been a fairly crap film if you knew that you survived like within the first couple of minutes? For anyone that's never seen it.
Yeah. It's called Jeopardy. It's called Jeopardy, and the Jeopardy at the end of the day, the Jeopardy is there all the way through until they go on the black screen. When I think it might be Duncan, they go on the black screen, and then you know, isn't he dead type stuff, and then they cut to Chris, and Chris walks in and sits down, and they put a bit of and I can see you look embarrassed. They're putting makeup on you, and you're a bit like, oh God, you know, here we go. You know, not used to being a celebrity. You know what I mean? And so,
loving it, to be honest. Yeah, that's all fake as well. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Have you got any other questions, Kev? Have you got anything else you want to share? I've got a few people I want to put on the screen who want to say stuff, but Kev, you got any other questions?
I've only got one more for you. And did you get the house finished?
Yeah, yeah. Again, so no, I don't know if you can quite see because you know I do Zoom. I can only put a fake background up, but on Mark's thing there, I couldn't. So I'm sat in my mother's bedroom at the moment, which you know, at 41 is a bit disconcerting. But yeah, so we did finish the house, but I've just sold it. Yeah, so I'm currently living in a caravan about 10 meters that way. Yeah, waiting to move somewhere else, which I can't do during lockdown. So yeah, anyway. But yes, we did. We got married and we finished the house and it was all a very happy end of it. Yeah.
You got married and you made a bit of a quip at the reception afterwards, didn't you? Something about like, you know, the second best kiss I've had today or recent. I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but.
Yeah, well, I was I live up in the Highlands, you know, in Scotland, and because I'm an Englishman, and they, you know, generally speaking, you're not popular around here, so I made an effort to get involved with the community when I got here, and I joined the local Coast Guard, you know. So the head of the Coast Guard very kindly drove Morag, you know, blue flashing lights to the wedding, you know. So he was there with us, and at some party, I think I'd given him a kiss on the lips because he hates that kind of thing. Yeah, so he was sat next to me, so that was a joke. Yeah, one or two people who'd given me a very decent on the lips. Yeah, and Duncan, you know, they got a standing ovation, obviously, and yeah. Dave was at work doing the professional he is. I did invite him.
Yeah, of course he was. Yeah, Dave's not been at your wedding. He's the Vulcan. He's Spock. He's like, no, I'm not. Yeah. I've got more people to say. Yeah, exactly. There's some great quotes here. I'm gonna put a few up. Here we go. So someone had to leave, but they said, I have to go, but much respect to you all. I feel sick hearing this, and thank goodness you're all safe. I've seen the film through my fingers. So I think that might be Julia, actually. So that's amazing. The greatest thing that was the thumbs up that you walked into the chamber when you walked into the chamber through the porthole.
Jimmy was there. That's why. Yeah. Hi, Jimmy.
Right. Yeah, so that's amazing. Gary says, I love this. Chris sees the incident in a positive light now. He's an amazing individual, and obviously you're part of the top colour blue club that we spoke about on the e-colours earlier. I would like more of all of that. Yeah. I'd like to talk to you. Thank you. I'd like to talk to you in more detail about that another time as well. But yeah, Gary's a top guy. Emma's saying, "Keep it together, Wilkes," because she thought I was going to cry there for a little bit, but I've managed to. I've kept it together, Em, don't you, right? She also says, "I had no idea about your job and what you actually do, and it's incredible, but not for her." Yeah, clearly. Yeah. Diana says, "Truly amazing." Jason saying, "Truly amazing and gripping insight," and thank you, obviously, particularly to Chris. Douglas is saying it's an amazing success story. And Michael is saying, can't believe how quickly 2 hours has just gone. I agree. I second that. 2 hours has just flown by out here. And that is something special that you know you're engaged in a conversation. And this is 4 people together sharing lots of insights and enjoying a good 2 hour conversation just for, a few hundred people watching and stuff like that. So it's really great. And I really agree. And sorry, one more from him. Dave is double busy. Do you remember the Mickey Flanagan? I am double busy. I've got to sign on and get back to work. But Dave was too busy to be at your. Yeah, tell him. You've got to sign on and get back to work and rescue. He's got to rescue more people. Chris, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to add?
God, you put me on a spot there. No, I don't think so. Yeah,
anything we haven't covered that we've missed.
We haven't talked enough about what a great guy I am, but apart from that, yeah.
Well,
I'm very happy with that.
So actually, do you know what? I'd like to end with this because we've talked a lot about this, but since the incident, obviously you've gone back to diving, you've continued with diving, you're now a dive supervisor, you're studying to be a dive.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right.
Only if George lets me be. Let's be honest. Yeah.
Brilliant slip. So you're studying to be a dive supervisor for the future, and I think if George lets you, you'll be bloody good at it. And what else do you do for good times? And what do you get out of life? And where's the future for you?
Oh, I know this cue. I listen to music, particularly music from the 90s, in the dance era. Yeah. Yeah, I know what's happening with me. I don't know.
He's not looking. Come on, Chris.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, I'm in the midst of reading that. That's for sure. Yeah. It's very good, by the way.
Thank you.
I've taken a decision to try and stop diving anyway, and literally in the last sort of 6 weeks, I've started doing this sort of training that takes about a year and a half under the tutelage of people like George at work to try and take that role on, which is, as George touched upon, I think massively demanding and a job, and it's one I don't know if I don't really till I get into the thick of it whether I'll be capable. Full stop. It's a really difficult plate spinning job, and George maybe downplays it a little bit, but you should have every respect for anybody who does that, because it's a very difficult thing to do. So yeah, I'm hoping to go down that path. Whether it works out or not, we'll see. We're hoping to move to France as a family. That's our sort of our big dream, life dream, if you like. Is we're hoping to decamp and move over there. So that's the caravan and the big move, But apart from that, just try and be happy and get through life as best I can, I suppose, same as everyone else.
Oh, bless you, mate. It's amazing. There's a couple more. Michelle's just saying the lesson here is when life gives you lemons. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very good, yeah.
There you go. Very good. And I think I might leave the last word here to Emma, certainly. The last word on the last breath. Actually, the last word of this will probably be with Kev, actually, because it says, Chris, you're so humble, and I'm so glad it was a good end. Yeah, we are really grateful for you being here, Chris, and thank you for sharing. Lots of people have loved this tonight. And Kev, can you believe you're sitting having a chat with these guys after? No,
definitely changed my perspective on the law of attraction, Mark. I'm a bit more of a believer, let's just say.
Well, this is it, because ultimately you sent me a message, so you told me on a call. I watched it. I made a couple of calls, and unbelievable. And here we are talking to a guy who survived, a really challenging, industrial accident, a real moment. So look, I just want to say, real thanks to you all, and thanks to everyone for being here. I think it's been utterly fascinating. I think, Chris, there's so much that we can take from this story. Your absolute honesty, your gallows humor when you need it, and the fact that the team, the whole team, rallied round and actually, it wasn't just like a one-man story, and it was so much more than that. And I love the fact that they were so able to get back to you and actually, get you out of there and get you back into reality, if you like, and the fact that you didn't suffer any injuries as well. I mean, yeah, wonderful, mate. Really, really wonderful.
Well, before we go, thank you very much indeed for having me, Mark. It's been a real pleasure. It's always lovely to talk to lovely people. I'll even include George in that, So, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for listening. Yeah, it's been a treat, so thank you.
No, brilliant. And George and Kev, lads, listen, I really appreciate your input into this as well. It's been utterly fascinating, and I love all the angles. I love all the thought that's gone into it. It's really special. And do share this. This interview will be up on my YouTube channel. It'll be there. People can watch it forever. Do share it with your friends and family. We're getting lots of brilliance and lots of amazing comments. So I just want to thank you all, guys. If you would all just stay there for a minute, I'll end the broadcast and then we can have a quick catch up and everything. But once again, thanks everybody for watching. Really, really appreciate it. Just as a little sideline for you, Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim, sent me a message about an hour before this interview and said to me, "What time are we doing the interview tonight?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim. I said, what are you talking about? I asked you and you weren't available. So I went for the B team. I'm joking. I went for the B team and I got Kevin, George, and this other fella, Chris. And here we are. And I've got this message of Fatboy Slim. And so if for anyone watching, massive love and respect to all three of you, of course. And Norman Cook will be joining me on June the 16th for another special Straight Talking. So that's going to be another fascinating evening. So, hey, listen, we're all people. We're all doing our job. We're all doing good things in the world. I've got nothing but love and respect for you three. Stay where you are, chaps. And I'll say good night to everyone. Good night, guys. Thanks so much.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.